Hello, everyone. Welcome to our next keynote session. As most of you know, I'm Pat Arnett. I'm the CEO of the Ethics and Compliance Initiative. It's my great pleasure to tee off our keynote for the morning, which is focusing on strategic leadership in the age of ESG. And as we thought about how to bring in someone who could speak on this topic, one of the things we know from all of you is that as you're getting more involved in ESG in your organizations, one of the key players at the table is someone who comes from PR, from communications. And so we felt that it would be really helpful to explore this topic of leadership in the age of ESG from that vantage point. So if you're familiar at all with the PR and communications world, you know that our next speaker is a rock star. Frances Ingham is Director General of the Public Relations and Communications Association, PRCA. PRCA is the world's largest professional PR body. It represents over 35,000 PR professionals in 82 different countries. And I'm very pleased that in the past year, ECI created a partnership with PRCA so that we can undertake collaborative research efforts, have joint distribution of resources and research. And so we're really excited about the relationship we've been building with PRCA and over the past year. Frances also holds the position of Chief Executive of the International Communications Consultancy Organization, which represents PR consultancies, and it's comprised by national trade organizations in 66 countries around the world. And I know that you have access to Frances's bio. He has an impressive background, number of accolades and awards. He's very active in a number of different organizations to improve PR practices around the world. So it's such a pleasure to have him here. I'm also very pleased to introduce you to Diana Marszalek, who is a senior reporter for PRovoke Media. After Frances finishes some opening remarks, Diana will join him for a Q&A session, and they'll be taking questions from all of you. PRovoke Media is the PR industry's leading source of news, trends, events, career information, and intelligence. And in her role, Diana covers all aspects of the communications industry from both the agency and the business side. And interestingly, she does a great deal of writing on issues related to business and consumers, ethics in particular, and diversity, equity, and inclusion. So she's also the right person to be here to talk with Frances and to help answer some of the questions that all of you raise. So with that, I am going to invite Frances to the stage. Frances, again, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Pat, for that very kind introduction. I'd like to thank ECI for this opportunity to speak at your conference this morning on a topic that is only going to grow in importance over the coming years. That's strategic leadership in the age of ESG. Now, as Pat mentioned, the PRCA is the world's largest PR association. I've been its Director General for the last 14 years. And I also run ECO, which is the umbrella body for 41 associations around the world. I do some work with the UK Government Communications Service, sitting on their Strategy and Evaluation Council as well. Now, given the PRCA's and ECO's memberships and global remits, naturally, we are also active in promoting excellence in public relations for challenging, supporting, and improving standards in ESG communication. And that's why we strongly believe in the strategic role of PR and communications in the age of ESG. Our overwhelming ambition is to represent our industry, to raise standards within it, and to provide guidance to it. So my comments come from that PR and communications perspective, but I hope have parallels and contain lessons for a wider community. So to begin, public expectations have utterly shifted over the past decade. There is an automatic expectation that profit alone is not everything. A very large proportion, not all, of people now expect purpose as well. And social media has meant that there is nowhere to hide. Behaviour that was acceptable previously or capable of being hidden, frankly, or of simply waiting it out for it to drop off the news agenda. Neither of those previous truths are true today, and a clear and critical element to that is ESG. Now, ESG programs, policies, and standards continue to evolve at a pace that is often hard to keep up with for many organizations. And that's why some of those organizations need the support of all parts and functions, especially of comms, to be able, in order to plot and execute their strategic leadership in what is a very complex area. Now, moreover, ESG leadership needs to be strategic, from the complexity of the topics to risk management, as well as proactive ESG programs used for brands and reputational improvement, and with this, a competitive advantage. Now, the age of ESG is, in my view, clearly upon us, and will, as I said at the beginning, become increasingly important as organizations seek to insulate them from unforeseen and unforeseeable risks. In the last 2 years alone, we've had to contend with so much. So a public that is increasingly concerned about climate change, for example, the COVID pandemic that has shocked all organizations, all economies, all people, frankly, in all corners of the world, and that has placed communications at the strategic heart of every organization. When there was no human interaction, all we had was communications to rely on, both to convey corporate messaging and for governments to convey critical health and safety messaging. And of course, the enormity of what is happening in Ukraine, the horrendous barbarity of one state towards another, the spotlight that has been shone on the dubious business decisions of so many corporations and businesses over the years, and their proximity to and relationship with the Russian state. And that most certainly does include, being honest, PRCA and ECO members who have had, but no longer have, significant relations in that part of the world. There's of course the impact on food and energy prices, and all of these pose significant questions of ethics and governance. It might be appropriate later for Diana and I to touch on the response of communications agencies in providing pro bono media relations support to the Ukrainian government, an example in many ways of ESG in crisis in action. So in the age of ESG, and all that we can see and that we cannot see as well, strategic leadership is required. And from the perspective of the PRCA and ECO, PR and communications is and will continue to be a vital part of this. So as businesses change, or as one might say, expand their focus, we would argue that there are three elements to be aware of in enabling companies to manage ESG effectively. Number one is ethics. Number two is research data and metrics. And number three is connecting the dots between ESG performance and stakeholder expectations. And I'll cover off those three in turn. Ethics. First of all, a wholehearted commitment to ethics that permeates every part of every organization, from those setting strategic direction at the top to those who are delivering on those decisions. We place ethics at the absolute heart of the PRCA. Our Global Ethics Council, chaired by my friend Mary Beth West, is integral to all of that work. It sets the bar and aims constantly to raise ethical standards. And that most certainly applies to ESG. To provide an example of what happens when the ethical culture is wrong, allow me to highlight an example from my own industry, where poor decisions, a lack of concern for social, economic, and political impact, and a failed management structure led to the destruction of an iconic PR company. In September 2017, my organization expelled a company called Bell Pottinger. It was the world's most famous PR company, working for multinationals and for governments, including the US government. Its largest ever contract, for example, was a Department of Defense one, re Iraq. And it also worked for people such as Alexander Lukashenko, the ruler of Belarus, and Asma al-Assad, the wife of the Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. Within 2 weeks of its expulsion, the company had collapsed and had been closed down. The reason? It had worked for a company called Oak Bay Capital, a company owned by the Gupta family with incredibly close links to the South African government under the now convicted Jacob Zuma. Now, Ed Caesar in the New Yorker magazine entitled it the reputation laundering firm that ruined its own reputation. According to Caesar, PR competitors, when debating whether to take on a questionable client, used to joke the answer was yes, no, or one for Bell Pottinger. Although Bell Pottinger's work for the Guptas included pretty routine PR duties, they also went on to spread articles, cartoons, and social media posts covertly, popularizing the term white monopoly capital and implying that the Gupta's opponents were sustaining the racist economic system left over from apartheid. One cartoon, for example, depicted fat, wealthy-looking white people feasting while malnourished black people ate crumbs from the floor. A South African newspaper editor claimed that Bell Pottinger literally stole the page from Goebbels and applied it to 21st century South Africa. It led to a great deal of violence in South Africa and a massive stirring of racial hatred and tension. The final straw for the firm, as it would be for any agency, was the loss of more and more of its clients who simply broke their contracts and walked away, rendering it insolvent. In theory, at least, the clients could have withstood considerable activist pressure and chosen to remain with Bell Pottinger. Instead, they walked. I imagine 10 years before they would have stayed. Every single person at that company lost their job. The great vast majority of them had never worked on the account. They knew nothing about it. They were collateral damage of their boss's greed overriding their sense of social responsibility. Directors who had been assured by their high-powered and very highly paid lawyers that their work was perfectly legal realized it was not the point, because the bigger point, and it applies to all businesses, not just by any means to PR ones, is that just because a course of behavior is legal and profitable, it doesn't mean it's wise. It doesn't mean it's sensible for the company. And that's the link with ESG. The public expects and demands purpose. Companies have nowhere to hide from scrutiny in this social media era. Secondly, the importance and reliance on communications research, data, and metrics continues to rise. This is both a recognition of the value of PR and communications, but also of our contribution to business growth, organizational goals, and the organization's conscience. The growing discipline connecting communications output with outcome is especially important in the age of ESG. This year's International Communications Consultancy Organization, ECO, World Report was released a few months ago. It's the definitive analysis and barometer for our global profession, and its response to market demand contains 3 significant findings relevant to this topic. Firstly, advertising value equivalence usage continues to decline as demand and adoption for meaningful and valid metrics increases. AVEs, for those of you who don't know, essentially measure coverage in newspapers, editorial coverage, as if it were an advert and put a financial figure on it. It's a truly discredited means of evaluating impact, but it is still prevalent in many parts of the world, though less and less prevalent as time goes by, and hardly prevalent at all in, for example, the US or the UK. Secondly, agency heads cite corporate reputation, ESG, purpose, and CSR as areas of their highest growth expected over the next 5 years, in a move away from basic media relations, getting stuff into newspapers. And thirdly, addressing the digital needs of clients is more important than ever, as they are 3 of the top 4 areas PR firms plan to invest in. That's relevant for ESG because it reflects the fact that social media is becoming the dominant medium through which companies communicate with their stakeholders. Now, these aren't disparate statistics. If we connect those 3 points, the rise in the use of research, data and metrics, high growth in corporate reputation, purpose, ESG and CSR, and the digital skilling of PR firms. At the heart of these lies ESG programs and their communication. How? Well, firstly, the research, data and metrics will drive all facets of company spending on PR and communications to minimize cost and to maximize the bottom line and brand contribution. Secondly, there's a huge growth in PR and communications supporting the corporate narrative, and this is intrinsically linked to CSR and, to this point, ESG programs. And thirdly, the social media savvy public and consumer is increasingly influenced by the ESG credibility of brands. The natural connector in many organizations today is the PR and comms function. They are sat right at that same intersection, responsible for owning and using the data, for overseeing the organization's comms, and ultimately aligning what it does with its ESG programs and how they are reported. As such, PR and comms professionals are uniquely positioned to provide strategic direction that aligns ESG programs and their communication with the organization's goals and the expectations of stakeholders and the public. And this leads nicely to the third element, the role of PR and comms in connecting the dots between ESG performance and public expectations, a fine balancing act that must be maintained with the skillful guidance of communications advice, managing the reality of the evidence and providing honest and transparent ESG performance, even when it goes wrong. For example, cocoa sourcing in West Africa is heavily reliant on small farms and farmer groups, making traceability to farm incredibly difficult to map. Goals of 100% traceability are often referenced as a target for ESG aspirations, but to deliver that requires vast changes in sourcing and a commitment to this for the long term. Therefore, there is a need to be realistic and honest about the rate of change. The role of PR and comms is to provide guidance and counsel, to engineer creative and positive messages supporting ESG, being ethical and honest in that advice, not just parroting what is legal, but saying what is deliverable and what is wise. To manage this balance, communications is changing from that of a function that just puts together information and passes it on into something far more strategic. And the COVID period has seen a distinct shift from the tactical to the strategic for my industry. Communications has taken on a role of ESG stewardship in a way that legal used to have it, quite frankly. But what makes PR and communications the natural fit for this role is that the function is often charged alone or in conjunction with others with issue and crisis preparedness and management. The upshot of this is that our profession is acutely aware of the reputational consequences of many actions and statements, particularly when they are not deliverable. And after all, when there is a reputational fire, communicators are a key element in the emergency response for an organization, and they know all too well where the dangers lie and the impact this can have on organizations, brands, and products. In our global Power of PR campaign last year, we highlighted research showing that 82% of companies view PR as critical to protecting reputation. And clearly demonstrating that ESG and reputation are joined at the hip is vital in influencing the value of an organization. To take, for example, Nestle, where a genuine goal for plastic reduction failed to include clear targets and a timeline according to NGOs, countering all the positive that could have been attributed to the brand for their bold commitment. The company's ambitions for its packaging to be 100% recyclable or reusable by 2025 was attacked by notable NGOs claiming Nestle's statement on plastic packaging includes more of the same greenwashing baby steps to tackle a crisis it helped to create. And the lesson I take from that is that ESG needs credibility and it needs specific deadlines. The PRCA would simply argue that our profession must have a leadership role in the age of ESG. This foundation and the three elements I've spoken of have helped to move PR and comms to a position of trust and responsibility in organizations regarding ESG communication. But until recently, PR and comms was seen as reactive or preventative. The challenge we are seeing for our members now in this more mature age of ESG is that their skills and experience are required to align ESG actions and goals and expectations with the organization, its history, its culture, its product, and its brand. This regularly is designed to support organizational reputation and as a tool for product marketing. Now, in the lead up to Impact, the PRCA and ECI, and I'd reflect Pat's comments about how much we value our relationship with ECI and hope to broaden it in the coming years. We surveyed our global members, both agency and in-house, to understand the critical drivers behind their organization's ESG programs. The base was relatively small, and I'd always urge caution when bases are small, but there is stuff we can learn from this. On the positive side, more than 80% of respondents' organizations either have ESG programs or practices in place. 45% say that they are critical to their core mission. On the negative side, there is confusion about what the reason for ESG activism is. A multiplicity of responses with little apparent thread running through them. And almost 2/3 of respondents said that ESG performance played no role whatsoever in determining senior executive pay. So it's a mixed picture, is the frank conclusion of that. In the age of ESG, organizations' products, brands, reputations, and growth require solid ESG fundamentals to be accepted by consumers and supply chains. But with this change, there is a risk. It's called greenwashing. As Mary Beth wrote in an article in PR Moment this week, when we in PR choose to work for a client, their crimes and misdemeanors, real or perceived, can attach themselves to us. We in PR must exercise our best judgment in who precisely we're working for and why. And we have to be ready to defend these choices where the chips fall where they may. We've always said at the PRCA, you can have whatever legal client you wish, but your reputation will be affected by those choices that you make, including the people who wish to work for you and with you. And that most certainly applies to ESG work. The simple question is it genuine? As such, it's more important than ever that PR and comms scrutinise and ask the right questions when it comes to claims as the pressure builds to align their strategy with ESGs. Very often, PR and comms professionals are part of ESG guidance teams, writing the guidelines for the organisation's marketing teams, spelling out what can and cannot be said by the organisation, getting the claims accurate and right. And in providing this guidance, PR and comms is not only leading the immediate ESG comms, but is effectively shaping the whole strategy, defining parameters and highlighting the future goals and targets for their organisations. A key role that PR and comms is able to play is in ensuring that as organisations change and adapt and hopefully lead in the age of ESG, the PR profession is a central part of that transformation. This is the opportunity and challenge for my industry to help shape the strategies that will shape the companies they work with and for. And so just as the role and place of PR and comms has shifted from the responsive and the tactical to the strategic and the insightful, so it has a role as a coordinator of ESG programs in tandem with other key functions. The latest Eco World Report showed that corporate reputation and strategic consultancy were the largest growth areas in our profession. And that was true in every region of the world, because we break down that data into 7 world regions. Furthermore, when respondents indicated their top 3 relevant skills for the future, the largest area identified was strategic advice. And that is relevant to ESG, obviously. In this age of ESG, complexity and multidisciplinary teams are critical to providing that strategic guidance for their organization. And while PR has an umbrella role here, any ESG program has to be connected with the reality of the organization. After all, taking the earlier example of traceability, for example, factors such as supply chain logistics, technology, suppliers are limiting factors that will guide target setting and goal achievement. And my key message here really is the need for ethical realism. But what we are seeing with many of our members is that PR and comms teams are becoming an unofficial, sometimes official, ESG center of excellence, bringing together all of those functions and organizational elements that together provide true strategic leadership. Such a role is a natural fit for our industry, whether it's around product change or reputational change or crisis management. To conclude, just as we've seen a growth in ESG reporting and comms and the complexity that this involves, so we have also seen a corresponding elevation in the importance of the PR and communications role. Our members are assuming increasingly important responsibilities in advising, guiding, stewarding, and executing ESG programs for their organizations. But to meet the organizational challenges for that strategic role of leadership in this new era of expectations, we need to build on those 3 fundamental critical elements of ethics, insight, and the center of excellence, putting together the DOTS role of PR and comms. With this in focus, PR and comms can meet the increasing demand for shaping and telling the ESG story and play that critical role within organizations in meeting public expectations that have moved and continue to move. I hope that was of interest. Thank you very much indeed for your time. I truly appreciate it. And I'll hand over to Diana.
Diana's here. Thank you, Francis. Very insightful. I appreciate the information and a lot of food for thought here that I hope we can unpack a bit through our questions and answers here. And I encourage everybody, please, to ask their questions. And I'm here to moderate them and we will get them in. So let's start with something you mentioned, which was the PRCA and decisions regarding Ukraine. I think it's kind of two-part, looking at the PR industry and where it stands and the role in this. It was the PRCA itself having to make its own decisions, and firms make their own decisions, which is their own, you could say, ESG or ethical decisions. And then in the way they supported their companies and clients and handled and the role that communicators played in that. Because if anything is top of mind, it's Ukraine right now.
Yes, thank you. So to break those two down in turn, we had a presence in Moscow the day that Russia invaded Ukraine. I stood down as chairman of PRCA Russia, and we have no links with Russia at all. ECO also expelled the Russian Association, and PRCA expelled every Russian agency. So that was that element. We also strongly encouraged all of our members who had links with Moscow to divest themselves of those links immediately. And there are no PRCA members who undertake any work in Russia, full stop, any longer. Now, let's just be clear, the great majority of people working in PR based out of Moscow and Petersburg had nothing to do with the decisions taken by the Kremlin, and they are collateral damage. One of the agencies ECO expelled is headed up by somebody who is a fierce critic of the Putin regime, but he absolutely understood the need for that expulsion, which speaks volumes about his character, frankly. So there is no PR involvement in Russia except that which has been built up on the ground by Russians themselves, many of whom are aghast at what's happening. The second element is the PR support provided by agencies to the government in Kyiv. Soon after the Russians invaded, I was contacted by a friend who used to work in the foreign ministry in Ukraine to ask if I could help establish a network of PR agencies working for free to support the media relations efforts of the Ukrainian government. And I did my best to do so. We have 300 agencies that have volunteered their services for free for the Ukrainian government in just getting their message out. And I think they've done a great job in helping the Ukrainian government, which has been absolutely superb in its communications over this period. And let's just be clear that the efforts of the success of the Ukrainian government and its little helpers around the world has been instrumental, I think, in keeping what's happening in Ukraine on the front pages and in changing public opinion and in changing government opinion. I think it's a great example of the power of communication, frankly.
Absolutely. And where do you see communications coming in terms of businesses' response? We were tracking it at PRovoke, who was leaving, who was staying. The companies that, had to comply with sanctions, that was kind of cut and dry, but other companies were pulling out. And we kept waiting to hear from McDonald's, right? Which is a great company, but they had, and I did not realize the number of people they had on the ground, which was like 60,000 employees, why it took so long for them to make their decision and pay and all that, which I understand now. And I'm not pinpointing McDonald's, I'm just talking about the various responses and how companies sort of communicated what they were doing and how communication supported those responses.
Yeah, so I think some companies have come out of this crisis with their reputations enhanced. They took decisions very early on to completely pull out of Russia. In many cases, being generous in paying off the staff who were losing their jobs through no fault of their own. Some were incredibly reluctant to do so and were kind of dragged by the media by social media into doing the right thing. And I think they've come out with their reputations significantly tarnished. I would draw a link with COVID, actually. The companies that reacted in a generous manner towards their team, where their bosses just didn't take pay and so on, and took the pain along with their colleagues, and those companies where their bosses took bonuses still, and clearly had, even when they were laying people off in their thousands. And that plays to the bigger truth that we've said for years, that a company's reputation is its most valuable asset. Really easy to trash in a day or two, very hard to build up, having done so over the years. Same is true for ESG, obviously, where the goals are realistic, ambitious, but realistic, and communicated honestly and ethically. It reflects very well on organizations. Where it is that greenwashing element, or where there is a lack of realism, it can be very negative. Rather than having a greenwashing campaign, you'd be better off having no ESG program whatsoever, because it only brings value if it's genuine.
Do you think stakeholders are patient enough to understand that? With the pressure of having this ESG program, it's hard, right? If you're going to change supply chains big, you may have the commitment, but any company, if you're depending on the size, this could take a long time. What role do communicators have to ensuring that that there's not greenwashing, and that it's rolled out in such a way, these narratives, that people can understand?
Well, for example, at the heart of our PRCA Code of Conduct, Rule 1 is tell the truth. That's what we expect our members to advise their clients and colleagues to do. And part of that clearly is, if it's going to take you a long time to change your supply chain, but that is your ambition, then be upfront about it and say, this is our ambition. We know it'll take a long time. It's a difficult position, but we're doing our best. I think that stakeholders, yes, are impatient, but also, I would hope and I believe, realistic. And it's the role of the comms people to provide that voice of realism and that candid advice to their colleagues and their clients.
And how do companies recover their reputations once they are tarnished?
You've got to make a decisive change, say sorry, admit you made mistakes, commit to putting them right and promising they'll never happen again, and then make sure you deliver on that, don't you?
Yeah, the deliver component is big.
Yeah, and frequently, obviously, get rid of the chief exec.
Yeah.
I say that with reluctance, given I am the chief exec of my own organization, but.
Right. Is it a battle for the chief exec to take the comms people? I don't want to say use the word seriously in a derogatory way, but is that still a challenge on communicators?
So, it will always be a challenge. There will always be this natural reaction of the chief exec to rely on the legal director's opinion, but that's something that has declined over the years. So I referred obviously to the Eco World Report. For the last 10 years, in the top 3 factors that have driven growth has been chief execs taking corporate reputation more seriously. So that's grown every year. And I think that's because it's the rise of social media. It's that, like I say, there is nowhere to hide when things go wrong. Stories don't die after a day or two. They drag on until you resolve them. And I also think part of the reason for chief execs taking corporate reputation more seriously than ever before is they realise the impact upon their own careers and prospects. And we can all think of CEOs who've screwed something up. Their company's reputation has been wrecked, and they've had to leave their own role. So I think that, and that happens increasingly frequently, doesn't it? And that's why I think that our industry is in a good place and it gets into a better place every year. Now, COVID has accelerated all of the changes that we had seen. So the shift away from advertising towards more cost-effective PR, we've been seeing that for years. The blending of disciplines between marketing and PR, the enormous rise of digital that COVID accelerated enormously for obvious reasons, but also that laser focus on companies' corporate reputations, that's shifting everything towards reputation. And so COVID has accelerated all of the trends that we have been seeing for the last 10 years. Maybe they've accelerated them by a further 10 over the course of 2.
Is there a panic as a result? Companies having to ramp up quickly, or these are things that are in motion? It's just taking it up a notch and elevating the communications.
And it's not just in the private sector, actually. So I have significant involvement in the public sector in the UK, and the role of communicators in the public sector has never been greater than over the past couple of years in conveying key messages to businesses about how to continue to operate, to employees about how to continue to have a salary, frankly, to people in general on how to not get COVID, not die. That there has definitely been a recognition that when it was a literal matter of communications being the difference for some people between being hospitalized and not hospitalized, being dead and not dead, that ministers and senior civil servants have taken communications advice far more seriously than ever before. And again, we've seen that with the superb Ukrainian government comms, and as I refer to, the impact that it has had on public opinion and government opinion around the world.
Yeah, it really is phenomenal. We have an exciting question from our audience. I'm going to read. Although there are a lot of opportunities for synergy and integration between the communications, PR, and ethics compliance organizations, it appears that there are also times when the two organizations are driving different messages or different levels of transparency. What guidance do you have for how we as E&C professionals and leaders can partner better with the communications PR organizations? Clearly, we are both advocates for the company and strive to protect the company's reputation.
That's rather a challenging question.
Okay, you got another 20 minutes, so you can go.
I would like to think that we can work in tandem, and that we frequently do. I mean, like I say, at the heart of our code that all of our members around the world have to adhere to is being honest, acting in the public interest, and being transparent. So we don't require, but we strongly encourage all of our members to declare all of their clients and to stand by the commercial decisions that they have made in terms of who they'll work with. And we take our ethical guidance incredibly seriously. I think there was, after Bell Pottinger, a step change in terms of agencies being more transparent and realizing that taking on unethical clients or behaving in an unethical manner was an existential threat to them. And you've certainly got more employees within agencies simply refusing to work on accounts that they don't feel comfortable with. Now, is there more we can do in this area? Yes, of course. And it's certainly the case that expectations of what is acceptable behavior and what isn't differ around the world, because the world PR market and business organisations, for that matter, are at different stages in how they view these issues. But I would hope that we can, at the PRCA and ECO, deepen that relationship with ECI. And we have a great relationship with the Institute of Business Ethics in the UK, which is kind of the sister equivalent organisation to ECI. And there is a bountiful desire amongst my members to undertake that sort of partnership working. So I know there's more to be done, but we're very happy to work hard at it.
Excellent. So Francis, you personally took a very strong stance against the invasion of Ukraine, or on the invasion of Ukraine. Do you expect other CEOs to take those strong stances on other social and political issues?
That's a tough question. I mean, I originally took a strong stance on Ukraine in a purely personal capacity. So that effort to put together a group of PR agencies willing to work, in essence, for the Ukrainian government for free was a personal thing. And then it morphed into a PRCA coordinating it element. And we now have daily support bulletins for the Ukrainian issue. And we provide a whole range of support and key messages for our members to convey. So some of them, are very keen on the material given to them by the Ukrainian government about the need to arm Ukraine. Some of them are more keen on other messages, and that's whatever they are comfortable with. We just give them the tools to make the right choices for them. In the broader issue of CEOs taking a political stance, I think it's a very complex area. There is a pressure for them to do so, frequently from their employees and the public. So the Black Lives Matter example would be a clear one, and pressure on CEOs to take a very clear stance on climate change matters as well. And I would encourage, and I think there is a value in CEOs taking political and social stances where it aligns with the values of their company and where they actually mean it. The difficulty, of course, lies where it doesn't align in any way with the values of their company.
Mm-hmm. That was my question, is it's very hard in some cases. A CEO is in fact the CEO of a company, but he or she is a person with their own individual.
Yeah. And where it doesn't align with their personal views. Right. Because it might be the age of ESG, but linked with it, it's also the age of authenticity. People like their leaders to be authentic rather than fake. So none of the greenwashing stuff, none of the spin stuff, to just be real people, and that can be difficult to convey as the leader of a company. And we see that. I mean, we've seen it for years, haven't we? In political terms, mm-hmm. And my background is political. The public tiredness of politicians just rattling out the same old party line and refusing to answer, and the inauthenticity of their leaders has further dragged down the reputation of politics and political engagement around the world. I think the same is even more dangerous for business leaders. So it's just about being authentic, isn't it?
It must be, because otherwise, I mean, it really could change the nature of what or whom a CEO is, right? You're looking for a business person first and foremost, but they're having to come out as a more dynamic, political, or at least social aware person, right? So it's changes the nature a bit of who could be a successful CEO.
No, entirely. I mean, I'd say that when the CEOs comment on things in a way they clearly don't mean, and they have no remit commenting on, then I think the public sees it purely as corporate positioning rather than authentic expression of views and concern.
So what's your guidance for companies, communicators, ethics people in companies establishing their ESG course, and what to champion publicly?
Well, something that is distinctly relevant to them, something that is deliverable, timely, achievable, and that fits with the values of their company. I mean, we can, without naming names, you can think of companies whose ESG plans are clearly never going to be delivered, are clearly just there as a veneer. So just to reflect and repeat really what I said in my comments, it's about being transparent and honest about what is realistic and achievable. And that's where I think there is a role for PR practitioners. So not just the legalistic, can we get away with saying this, which sometimes is the advice of the lawyers, but something that is genuine, and that candid advice to CEOs about what they ought to say. I mean, if I go back to the Bell Pottinger example, which is about ethics, but was also about ESG really, because it was completely ignoring what the impact of their work was on economic and social and political stability in South Africa. I mean, Bell Pot had a great ESG program in theory. It said all the right things, and it did the absolute opposite in practice in South Africa. Now, the advice of their lawyers, both about the piece of work they were doing and also about the consequences of their expulsion, was this is all perfectly legal and we're going to be perfectly fine. And it was remarkable that a company of PR people didn't think more deeply about the reputational impact of what they were doing and how their clients and staff, for that matter, would react to what they were doing. So I just want comms advice to always be candid and realistic and built on ethical practices. And one of those is telling the truth. And
good communication.
Telling the truth about your ESG policy is critical to that.
We have time for one more quick question that I want to ask you, and then we unfortunately have to close our discussion. How do you see the PR function integrating ESG as a core aspect of a company's brand?
Well, that's about unified messaging that works with the PR function, the product that you're offering, and the whole marketing operation that you're running. So that's an integration point. And I referred earlier on to the blending of disciplines and about PR and marketing coming closer together, and also providing that high level strategic advice to CEOs and other directors. And that's at the heart of it. That's about building an ESG program that reflects the company's brand, reflects all of the marketing, and it is at the absolute heart of everything that a company does, rather than a little add-on, an afterthought at the end.
Great. This was a great I could continue this conversation, but I can't because it's time for us to wrap up. So nice to speak with you. I'm going to turn this back over to Pat.
Thank you, Dana.
Thank you.
I feel bad because I am the conversation killer, and just listening to the two of you, what a tremendous conversation. And I gained so many insights just personally from listening to the two of you. Francis, one thing I want to just point out to our audience from previous conversations we've had, the work you have done and PRCA, the stance you have taken in particular in support of Ukraine has been to the risk of your own personal safety. So it has not been without some personal sacrifices. And I just want to thank you for your courage. And I'm sure that people in our audience have been duly impressed by just the passion you've brought to that.
Thank you, Pat. That's very kind of you. Very kind.
And just one other comment that came to mind as I was listening to you. Sir, it's been very helpful to hear you talk about the role of PR and communications professionals in companies as they think about ESG and establishing reputation, but also making decisions about the issues they'll champion based on their values. And E&C professionals are in many ways the champions, protectors, shepherds of core values in companies. And so I know that as we have been talking more with PRCA, both our organizations see that as a really important synergy between the two. And within corporations, that's why E&C and PR communications professionals have to be close partners, especially as ESG grows. So we're looking forward to continued work with you. And as we think about how do we help our respective members improve their practices, they're thinking about ESG. So again, we're looking forward to this just being a first conversation among what we hope will be many. So,
Definitely.
and so before I wrap us up, again, Francis, Diana, thank you so much for being here, for your very insightful conversation. We truly, truly appreciate it. And for our audience members, thank you for joining us. We are going to close out this session for a short break, 15-minute break, and then we'll see you at the next round of breakout sessions. Thank you, everyone.